Yeah, but they thought Big Tree couldn't cook just because I've been in the streets all my life. Yeah, pepper steak and rice, like, yeah. Look at that. First meal, corn, feel me? A little like something going, you know what I'm saying? Show it up close. Tree trying to grow up. Trying to grow up. Them good vegetables and that bell peppers.
We begin tonight with the Burton man accused in the murder and dismemberment of his wife and how he had a long history of criminal behavior dating back to 1998, according to records from the Michigan Department of Corrections. Tony Roosevelt Roy's crime spree came to an end this week when he was shot by a Michigan State police trooper during a routine traffic stop in Detroit. Our Don Jones joining us now with more on Roy and what police say he did. Don.
Matt, the details of this case pretty gruesome. Police say Tony Roy, at the time of his death, was an absconder from Parole. They believe he is the one responsible for killing his wife and then cutting up her body and placing her body parts in trash bags.
On July 14, 2023, officers entered apartment 14B in Burton, Michigan, and discovered plastic trash bags stuffed with human remains. Just hours before, 41-year-old Shauna Roy had been alive, preparing to leave a toxic marriage. The bathroom scene would haunt even seasoned investigators. Black garbage bags containing dismembered body parts. Blood staining the floors and walls. Tools abandoned nearby, their purpose now horrifically clear. This wasn't just a murder, it was an obliteration, an attempt to erase a human being completely. Shauna Roy never knew the full truth about the man she married. Tony Roy presented himself as reformed, a man who had learned hard lessons during his time behind bars. What she didn't know was that her husband carried 17 felony convictions spanning decades, assault with intent to cause great bodily harm, fleeing police, domestic abuse, drug charges. A violent past carefully hidden behind promises of change. But the most disturbing fact wasn't Tony's criminal history, it was that he should never have been free to kill. Just 3 days before Shauna's murder, on July 11th, Tony Roy was officially declared an absconder from parole. The system knew he had violated his terms of release. They knew he had disappeared from supervision. Yet no immediate action was taken to locate him. For 72 critical hours, Tony Roy remained at large. For 72 hours, the clock ticked down on Shauna's life while the mechanisms designed to protect the public failed completely. In this episode, we'll track the final days of Shauna Roy's life and the manhunt that followed her death. We'll examine the text message that exposed Tony's deception, a single word that raised alarm among Shauna's friends. And we'll reveal the dramatic confrontation that ended a 3-day search when Michigan State troopers cornered Tony with another potential victim in his car. This is the story of a system that watched a predator walk free, a woman who tried to escape, and the 72 hours that made all the difference. Shauna Roy was born on June 12, 1982, in Saginaw, Michigan, the youngest of 3 children in a close-knit family. Her childhood home fostered the compassion that would define her life. At Saginaw High School, she excelled beyond academics, joining student council and the cheerleading squad. After graduating in 2000, she pursued psychology and social work at Delta College, driven by a genuine desire to help others. By 2023, Shauna had established herself as a production operator at Next Tier Automotive in Auburn Hills. Despite the demands of her job, she never abandoned her dream of opening an adult foster care home in her hometown, a vision of creating a safe haven for those in need. Her best friend Dominique described her as the heart of every gathering, someone whose laughter could transform a room. This magnetic warmth extended to all her relationships. As a mother to 1 child from a previous relationship, Shauna was fiercely protective, creating clear boundaries between her romantic life and her role as a parent. Friends consistently spoke of her loyalty and attentiveness. She listened without judgment and showed genuine interest in others' lives, cultivating deep connections rather than superficial ones. At 41, Shauna stood at the threshold of a promising new chapter. She had the education, experience, and vision to pursue her dreams, surrounded by family who cherished her and friends who admired her strength. What she couldn't have known was that as she began making plans to reclaim her independence from a controlling marriage, Tony Roy was watching her every move with mounting rage, his own plans forming that would transform her bright future into a crime scene that would shock an entire community. In 2020, Shauna Roy's life took a fateful turn when she connected with Tony Roy online. Their early conversations seemed promising. Tony was attentive, responsive, and appeared genuinely interested in her life. He spoke with conviction about his past mistakes and the lessons he'd learned during his time behind bars. To Shauna, he presented himself as a man seeking redemption, someone who had faced his demons and emerged stronger. "I just feel good, man. I'm just happy to be off paper finally," Tony would say in videos he posted online. The feeling of being free. No man should be held captive. What Shauna didn't know, what she couldn't have known without a thorough background check, was that Tony's criminal record stretched back to 1998. It wasn't just a minor offense or two. His history included assault with intent to do great bodily harm, fleeing police, domestic abuse, and drug charges. By the time they met, he had accumulated 17 felony convictions. Even as he courted Shauna, he remained on parole. But Tony was skilled at crafting a narrative of transformation. He shared thoughts in online videos about the psychological burden of incarceration, positioning himself as thoughtful and introspective. He spoke about wanting to be better, about appreciating those who gave him chance after chance. These performances were convincing enough that Shauna believed in his capacity for change. Their relationship progressed quickly. On July 22, 2022, they married, officially becoming husband and wife. For a brief period, Shauna might have believed she had found a partner who understood struggle and valued freedom. But the honeymoon phase wouldn't last. The shift began subtly. Tony started questioning Shauna's movements, where she was going, who she was seeing, when she would return. What initially might have seemed like interest or concern gradually revealed itself as control. He restricted her movements, monitored her phone, and isolated her from friends and family. Friends noticed the change immediately. Shauna, once reliably present and communicative, began to withdraw. Her calls became less frequent, and when she did reach out, there was a tension in her voice that hadn't been there before. Behind closed doors, the situation was far worse than anyone outside could see. The accusations came next. Tony repeatedly accused Shauna of infidelity without evidence, creating a climate of constant suspicion. These accusations served a purpose. They justified his increasing surveillance and control of her life. They provided a pretext for checking her phone, limiting her social interactions, and demanding her whereabouts at all times. Then came the violence. What began as verbal abuse escalated to physical assaults. Shauna's best friend Dominique would later reveal that Shauna had confided in her about being struck, closely monitored, and subjected to constant accusations. Dominique had urged her to leave, to find safety away from Tony. But like many victims caught in cycles of abuse, Shauna faced barriers to escape that weren't visible from the outside. By July 2023, approximately 1 year into their marriage, Shauna had reached her breaking point. The fear had become unbearable. The isolation was complete. The violence was escalating. She made the decision that domestic violence experts identify as the most dangerous moment in an abusive relationship. She decided to leave. Shauna told Tony she was leaving him. She needed to return to Saginaw, to the family that still offered her unconditional support, to rebuild the life that had been systematically dismantled during her marriage. It was a courageous decision, one that required her to acknowledge that the man she had married was not the reformed person he had claimed to be. What Shauna couldn't have known was that this decision, this act of self-preservation, would trigger a lethal rage in Tony. To him, her departure wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was a challenge to his control, a defiance he couldn't tolerate. As Shauna packed her belongings and made arrangements to return to her family, Tony was watching. His expression of rehabilitation had been a performance, and now the mask was slipping. The man who had spoken so eloquently about freedom and second chances was about to reveal his true nature in the most horrific way possible. The stage was set for a confrontation that would end with Shauna Roy's dismembered body in trash bags and trigger a 3-day manhunt across Michigan. But before police would discover the crime scene, Tony would make one critical mistake, a text message that would expose his deception and set the investigation in motion. On July 14, 2023, inside apartment 14B on Kings Lane in Burton, Michigan, Shauna Roy's decision to leave her marriage triggered a violence so extreme it would later shock even veteran law enforcement. What happened in those dim rooms would remain unknown until investigators pieced together the evidence, but the brutality was undeniable. Tony Roy, faced with losing control over his wife, erupted into a murderous rage. With his bare fists, he began a savage assault on Shauna. The attack escalated when he grabbed a metal pipe, striking her repeatedly with fatal force. But even this wasn't enough to satisfy his fury. In a final act of dominance, he wrapped a belt around her neck and pulled until she stopped breathing. It was not quick. It was not merciful. It was a prolonged act of violence born from rage and the desperate need to maintain control. But what Tony did next revealed a calculated attempt to literally erase Shauna from existence. With methodical precision that suggests premeditation rather than panic, he began the grim process of dismembering her body. First with a knife, then with a saw, he worked to reduce a human being, a daughter, a mother, a friend, into anonymous pieces. He stuffed these remains into black plastic trash bags, sealing them as if they were nothing more than household waste. Then he placed these bags in the bathroom, perhaps believing this would buy him time to formulate his next move. Tony then attempted to clean the apartment, scrubbing blood from surfaces and removing evidence. But like most killers, he underestimated the persistence of blood evidence and the difficulty of completely erasing the signs of such violence. The next day, July 15th, Tony made a critical error, one that would ultimately expose his crime. He picked up Shauna's phone and composed a text message to her best friend, Dominique. In it, he impersonated Shauna, claiming she was fine, just busy with life. It might have seemed like a clever move to delay suspicion, but there was a problem. The message read, "Hey honey, I'm fine, just been busy." That single word, honey, immediately set off alarm bells for Dominique. In all their years of friendship, Shauna had never addressed her with that term of endearment. It was a linguistic fingerprint that didn't match Shauna's pattern of communication. The message didn't just feel wrong, it felt like someone else entirely. "That's not how she talks," Dominique would later tell investigators. "Shauna never called me honey. Never." This linguistic slip became the first thread that would unravel Tony's deception. Dominique, now deeply concerned, immediately reached out to Shauna's mother and sister. None of them had heard from Shauna in days, a silence that was completely out of character for someone so connected to her family. The growing sense of dread prompted them to contact the Burton Police Department. They requested a welfare check at the Kings Lane apartment, explaining their concerns about the suspicious text and the uncharacteristic silence. At approximately 7:20 p.m. on July 15th, officers arrived at apartment 14B. They knocked on the door and received no response. Given the concerning circumstances, they made the decision to force entry into the residence. What they found inside would haunt them for years to come. Blood stained the floors and furniture. Tools, knives, a saw, lay abandoned near the bathroom, their purpose now horrifically clear. And in the bathtub, they discovered the black trash bags containing Shauna's dismembered remains. The officers immediately secured the scene and called for additional units. Crime scene technicians arrived to document and collect evidence. The medical examiner was notified. But one thing was immediately apparent: Tony Roy was nowhere to be found. As investigators processed the apartment, they found Shauna's phone, the device used to send the fake text to Dominique. They also noted that her purse, ID, and other personal items were missing. This suggested that Tony hadn't just fled, he had taken items that could help him maintain the fiction that Shauna was still alive or help him establish a new identity. The Burton Police Department quickly issued a Be on the Lookout, BOLO, alert for Tony Roy. They also began the process of obtaining arrest warrants, charging him with open murder and mutilation of a dead body, both serious felonies carrying severe penalties in Michigan. But the investigation was just beginning. Where had Tony gone? Was he still in the area? Had he crossed state lines? And perhaps most urgently, was he alone, or had he found another potential victim? The answers would come from an unexpected technological source. Investigators obtained cell phone data that would allow them to track Tony's movements after the murder. What they discovered was chilling. He had fled Burton and traveled to Detroit, approximately 70 miles away. More concerning was another piece of information. Tony wasn't alone. With him was another woman whose name has not been released to protect her privacy. Based on preliminary information, police believed she might be being held against her will, potentially the next victim if Tony wasn't apprehended quickly. With this information, the Burton Police Department coordinated with the Michigan State Police and the Detroit Police Department. A multi-agency manhunt was now underway, racing against time to find Tony before he could harm anyone else. As night fell on July 15th, digital billboards across southeastern Michigan displayed Tony's photo and vehicle information. News stations broadcast urgent warnings. Social media lit up with shares of the wanted poster. But despite the massive effort, Tony Roy remained at large, armed, dangerous, and unpredictable. For the next 2 days, Shauna's family waited in agonizing limbo, mourning her death while knowing her killer was still free. What they couldn't know was that the manhunt was about to reach a dramatic and violent conclusion on a Detroit street just after midnight on July 17th. As dawn broke on July 16th, the search for Tony Roy intensified. Law enforcement agencies across Michigan coordinated their efforts, sharing intelligence and resources. The Michigan State Police took the lead on tracking Tony's digital footprint, while Detroit police conducted targeted sweeps of areas where he might be hiding. Cell phone data had placed Tony in Detroit, but the sprawling city offered countless places to disappear. Investigators worked methodically, analyzing his past addresses, known associates, and favorite haunts. They interviewed family members who might have been in contact with him, though most claimed they hadn't heard from Tony in days. What troubled investigators most was the woman believed to be with Tony. Her identity was being protected, but preliminary information suggested she wasn't a willing companion. Was she being held hostage? Was she another victim in the making? These questions added urgency to an already critical manhunt. By the evening of July 16th, investigators had narrowed their search to several neighborhoods in western Detroit. Surveillance teams were deployed, and patrol officers were briefed with Tony's photo and vehicle description. The net was tightening, but Tony remained elusive. Meanwhile, forensic teams at the Burton apartment continued processing evidence. Blood spatter analysis revealed the violent nature of the initial attack. Tool marks on bone fragments indicated the methodical nature of the dismemberment. Personal items belonging to Shauna, her phone, ID, and credit cards, were missing, suggesting Tony had taken them either to delay identification or to use her resources while on the run. The autopsy findings, though preliminary, painted a grim picture of Shauna's final moments. Blunt force trauma from both fists and a metal object. Ligature marks consistent with strangulation. The medical examiner would later confirm that Shauna had died before the dismemberment began, a small mercy in an otherwise merciless crime. Just after midnight on July 17th, the manhunt reached its climax. Michigan State troopers on patrol near Telegraph Road and 7 Mile Road in Detroit spotted a vehicle matching the description of Tony's car. The license plate confirmed it. They had found their suspect. Following protocol for high-risk stops, multiple units converged on the location. Officers positioned their vehicles strategically, creating a perimeter while maintaining distance. Through their loudspeakers, they issued clear commands. "Driver, turn off the engine and place your hands outside the window." Inside the car sat Tony Roy and the female passenger. What happened next unfolded in a matter of seconds, captured partially on police dash cameras, and later described in official reports. Tony, cornered and desperate, pulled out a handgun. In a moment that revealed his true nature, he first pointed the weapon at himself, then turned it toward the passenger. His intentions were clear. He would not be taken alive, and he wouldn't allow his companion to survive either. Officers, recognizing the imminent threat to the passenger, made a split-second decision. Multiple troopers opened fire, their bullets shattering the car windows. "Roll down the passenger window and drop the gun outside the car," an officer shouted. Then came the urgent commands, "Get her out! Get her out! Come on, come on!" As officers approached the vehicle, they found Tony Roy slumped over the steering wheel, fatally wounded. The female passenger was injured by flying glass, but otherwise unharmed. Medical personnel were immediately called to the scene. "Get medical rolling." "Get her medical," an officer called out. Tony Roy was pronounced dead at the scene. The 3-day manhunt had ended in gunfire, bringing a violent conclusion to a case defined by violence from the start. Inside the vehicle, investigators found crucial evidence linking Tony directly to Shauna's murder. Her ID, her phone, her purse, all items taken from the apartment after the killing. They also recovered the weapon Tony had brandished, a handgun registered in his name. The woman in the car was transported to a local hospital for treatment of minor injuries. In subsequent interviews, she provided information that confirmed investigators' suspicions. She had not been with Tony willingly and feared for her life. Her identity continues to be protected, but authorities believe she may have been the next victim had police not intervened when they did. As news of Tony's death spread, reactions were mixed. Some expressed relief that he could no longer harm others. Some felt that justice, in its own way, had been served. Others lamented that Shauna's family would never see Tony face trial for his crimes, never hear him answer for what he had done. But as investigators closed one chapter of the case, they opened another. How had a man with 17 felony convictions, a man declared an absconder from parole just days before the murder, managed to remain free long enough to kill? What systemic failures had allowed Tony Roy to slip through the cracks with deadly consequences? The answers would reveal troubling gaps in Michigan's parole supervision system, gaps that would soon become the focus of public outrage and calls for reform. In the days following Tony Roy's death, the full scope of the tragedy came into sharper focus. The medical examiner's final report confirmed what investigators had suspected. Shauna Roy had died from a combination of blunt force trauma and strangulation. The dismemberment had occurred post-mortem, a calculated attempt to dispose of evidence rather than an act of spontaneous rage. Evidence recovered from Tony's car provided the final links in the chain connecting him to the murder. Beyond Shauna's personal belongings, forensic teams found traces of her blood on clothing in the trunk. The weapon he had brandished during the police confrontation matched one missing from the apartment. The case against Tony Roy was ironclad, but came too late for justice in a courtroom. What emerged as the most disturbing aspect of this case wasn't just the brutality of the crime, but how preventable it should have been. On July 11, 2023, just 3 days before Shauna's murder, Tony Roy was officially declared an absconder from parole by the Michigan Department of Corrections. He had violated the terms of his supervision and disappeared from monitoring. Yet despite this designation, no immediate action was taken to locate and apprehend him. No officers were dispatched to his last known address. No urgent alerts were issued to local law enforcement. For 72 critical hours, Tony Roy remained free while bureaucratic wheels turned slowly, too slowly to save Shauna's life. This revelation ignited public outrage. In Saginaw and Burton, community members demanded answers. How could someone with 17 felony convictions, someone already flagged as an absconder, have been allowed to remain at large? What systemic failures had created this deadly gap in supervision? The system didn't just fail Shauna, said one community advocate at a public forum. It abandoned her. Social media platforms flooded with posts about Shauna, sharing her story and expressing collective grief. Many posts included purple ribbons, symbols of domestic violence awareness, alongside calls for accountability from parole authorities. The hashtag Justice for Shauna began trending regionally, then nationally. In the weeks that followed, candlelight vigils drew hundreds of mourners. Purple ribbons adorned trees and railings throughout Burton and Saginaw. Shauna's family, though devastated by their loss, found some comfort in the community's embrace and their shared determination that her death would not be in vain. Perhaps the most powerful response came from Dominique, Shauna's best friend, who established a foundation in her name focused on helping women safely leave abusive relationships. The most dangerous moment is when they decide to leave, she explained in a television interview. That's when they need the most support, the most protection. The case has since become a catalyst for examining how parole violations are handled, especially for offenders with violent histories. State legislators have proposed Shauna's Law, which would require immediate action when individuals with domestic violence convictions abscond from parole. For those watching this story unfold, there are critical lessons to take away. Research potential partners' backgrounds before commitment. Tony deliberately misled Shauna about his extensive criminal history. Recognize isolation tactics as early warning signs. When someone begins cutting you off from friends and family, restricting your movements, or constantly monitoring your communications, these are red flags that should not be ignored. Take immediate action when someone with a violent history violates parole. Community safety depends on swift responses to these violations. Shauna Roy should still be here today. She should be pursuing her dream of opening that adult foster care home in Saginaw. She should be watching her child grow up. She should be lighting up rooms with her laughter. Instead, her story has become a painful reminder of what happens when systems fail and warning signs go unheeded. But it has also become a call to action, a demand that we do better, that we learn from this tragedy, that we create change that might save the next Shauna. What do you think could have been done differently? What changes need to happen to ensure someone like Tony Roy cannot harm again? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if this case moved you, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this video. Every view helps amplify Shauna's story and could help prevent another like it.